Johnny Cash did not write Hurt, but by the time the world heard him sing it, the song no longer belonged only to the man who did. That is how powerful the performance was. When 9 Inch Nails released Hurt in 1994, it sounded like a private collapse happening in public. It was raw, cold, modern, young. When Johnny Cash recorded it in 2002 for American 4, the words barely changed, but the meaning changed completely. Now the voice belonged to a man in his 70s, a man whose body was failing, a man who had survived addiction, disgrace, faith, reinvention, and time itself. By then, Johnny Cash was no longer just a country singer. He was a national symbol, the man in black, the outlaw, the believer, the survivor. But symbols can become trapped inside their own legend. And by the 1980s, that had started to happen to Cash. The hit records were slowing down. Radio had changed. The industry had changed. And Johnny Cash, once one of the most essential voices in American music, risked becoming something preserved instead of present. Then, Rick Rubin entered the story. Rubin understood something many people around Cash did not. Johnny Cash did not need bigger production. He did not need to sound younger. He did not need to chase the modern world. He needed space. He needed silence. He needed songs stripped down far enough that the only thing left between the listener and the truth was that voice. That became the American recordings era, a late career rebirth built not on polish, but on exposure. Cash recorded songs by unexpected writers, not to shock people, but to prove something. That a real voice can cross genres when it carries enough human weight. By the time American 4 arrived, Johnny Cash was older, sicker, and somehow more revealing than ever. So when he chose Hurt, he was not choosing novelty. He was choosing a song strong enough to hold the weight of an entire life. At first glance, Hurt did not seem like an obvious Johnny Cash song. It came from a completely different world. Trent Reznor had written it from a place of anguish, addiction, self-loathing, and emotional ruin. But that was exactly why it mattered. Johnny Cash recognized something in it. Not the sound, the wound. Cash had lived through pills, public humiliation, spiritual exhaustion, and the long shame of losing control of his own life. By the early 2000s, he was looking back across all of it from the far side of old age. That changes a song. When a younger man sings, "I hurt myself today," it sounds like confession in the present tense. When an old man sings it, especially an old man who looks like Johnny Cash looked by then, it sounds like testimony. It sounds like the final accounting of a life already lived. Rubin protected that feeling. The arrangement stayed spare, patient, bare. Nothing flashy, nothing decorative, nothing standing between the lyric and the age in Cash's voice. And then came the video. That is where Hurt stopped being just a remarkable cover and became something unforgettable. Director Mark Romanek built the video around contrast. Old Johnny Cash and young Johnny Cash. The legend and the frail body. The grand myth and visible decay. Much of it was filmed at the House of Cash Museum in Hendersonville. a place that once celebrated the size of the legend, but now looked faded, dusty, and nearly ghostly. Cash sits at a table. He looks into the camera. He moves slowly. The house around him looks like memory itself, and the video refuses to flatter him. That is why it works. It lets old age be visible. It lets illness be visible. It lets mortality sit right there in the frame. And then June Carter appears, only briefly. But those few seconds change everything. By then, she too was visibly frail. And if you know their story, you understand immediately what her presence means. This was not just a wife appearing in a music video. This was the woman who had helped pull Johnny Cash back from addiction and destruction years earlier. The woman who had stayed. The woman who had seen the whole long cost of being Johnny Cash. So now, there they were, both near the end, standing inside a song about damage, memory, and loss. That is why Hurt feels less like performance and more like reckoning. When Trent Reznor first heard that Johnny Cash wanted to record Hurt, he was unsure. The song was deeply personal to him. It came from a private place. Then he saw the video, and later he said something unforgettable. He said, "It felt like somebody kissing your girlfriend." It felt invasive, strange, as if the song was no longer entirely his. Then he said something even more important. He said, "That song is not mine anymore." That may be the clearest explanation of what happened. Johnny Cash did not just reinterpret Hurt. He absorbed it. He aged it. He carried it through an entirely different life and returned it transformed. Reznor's version is about implosion. Cash's version is about aftermath. Reznor sounds like a man trapped inside the wound. Cash sounds like a man standing in the ruins, looking around and telling you what the damage cost. That is why older audiences respond so strongly to Cash's version. It does not depend on youth, fashion, or genre. It depends on recognition, loss, memory, pride, love, failure, survival. Not as abstract ideas, as things carried in the body. The timing made Hurt feel even more final. The video was released in 2003. June Carter Cash died in May of that year. Johnny Cash died in September. So even though Hurt was not literally the last song he ever recorded, it became, for millions of people, his farewell. Not because someone marketed it that way, because the performance already carried that weight. For many younger listeners, Hurt became the doorway into Johnny Cash. Not Ring of Fire, not Folsom Prison Blues, not I Walk the Line. Hurt. And through that doorway, they found something extraordinary. Not simply an old singer covering a younger band's song. They found a whole American life compressed into 4.5 minutes. That is why Hurt became more than a cover. It became a final confession. Not confession as scandal, confession as reckoning. A truthful last accounting. Johnny Cash did not just sing Hurt. He turned it into goodbye. And that is why Hurt became Johnny Cash's final confession.